Have you ever felt the need to be in charge of every situation? You know that urge to steer the ship, make all the decisions, and hold the reins tight? Many of us feel this way at some point. It's pretty common, especially for people who like having control. But here's the thing. Sometimes letting go and letting someone else lead can be really tough. Even those who are usually laid back might find this challenging. Now, imagine how this plays out in everyday life. There are moments, big and small, when we simply have to step back and surrender control. It's not easy, but it's often necessary. And if you're a Christian, this concept of surrendering takes on an even deeper meaning. It's not just a once-in-a-while thing, it's an everyday commitment. Christians believe in surrendering to Christ and letting Him take the lead every single day. But what does it really mean to let someone else take over, especially when it comes to something as big as your life's direction? It means trusting that they know better, that they have a bigger plan. For Christians, it means believing that Christ has a vision for their lives that surpasses their own understanding. This kind of surrender requires patience. It's about trusting in God's timing, not our own. Often, we want things to happen right now on our schedule. But the truth is, things will happen when they're supposed to happen, according to a timeline we might not immediately understand or agree with. Take the biblical story of David, for example. It's a fantastic story that really highlights this idea of divine timing and surrender. David's life was a roller coaster of incredible highs and terrifying lows, and it all started in a pretty dramatic way. David was the youngest son of Jesse, living in a time when Samuel, a major prophet, was looking for the next king of Israel. See, God led Samuel to Jesse's house, where he looked at each of Jesse's sons, expecting to find the king among them. But God rejected each one. It wasn't until they fetched the youngest son, David, who was out tending sheep, that God told Samuel, "This is the one." Even after being anointed, David didn't become king right away. He had to wait for years, facing life-threatening challenges, including being hunted by the current King Saul, who was threatened by David's destined rise to power. During this time, David had multiple chances to take matters into his own hands. He could have killed Saul, especially in moments when Saul was vulnerably within his reach. Yet David chose not to. He held back because he respected that Saul was still God's anointed king. His men didn't get it. They even pushed him to take action. But David stood firm. He said something quite profound. "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master." The Lord's anointed. He believed that it wasn't his place to force God's timing. David's patience and respect for God's plan are remarkable. He didn't just want to be king. He wanted to be the king that God intended him to be, at the right time, under the right circumstances. He knew that if he tried to rush the process, it wouldn't end well. Eventually, Saul died, as all people do, and David became king. His journey to the throne wasn't easy or quick, but it was the path that God had laid out for him. And because he respected that path, he is remembered not just as a king, but as a man after God's own heart. If you find yourself wrestling with the need to control everything, think about David. Sometimes the best action is inaction. Letting go can lead to greater outcomes than you could ever engineer on your own. So, think about this. If everything is under God's control, what does that mean for us on a daily day? It means trusting that God is steering our lives just as much as He's looking out for every tiny sparrow. If God doesn't forget those little birds, surely He's not forgetting us. This is a comforting thought, especially on tough days when nothing seems to be going right. Now, it can be hard to grasp the idea that God controls not just the big events, but even the small, everyday ones. But if you believe that He created everything and has a plan, it starts to make sense. Like, if you get lost in a new city, you'd trust a local over another tourist, right? Well, God is like the ultimate local of not just a city, but the entire universe. And it's not about being passive. Trusting God doesn't mean sitting back and doing nothing. It's about being active in your faith while knowing that the results come from God. It's like planting a garden. You plant the seeds and water them, but it's God who makes them grow. You do your part and trust Him to do His. We also talked about how unique humans are. Unlike any other creature, we were made in God's image, with souls that can connect with Him through the Holy Spirit. This isn't just some small detail, it's a huge honor and responsibility. We get to communicate with the Creator of everything, and He listens to us. This divine connection is why it's so important to respect God's commands and timing. When the Bible tells us to love our neighbors and not to harm others, it's not just making suggestions. These commands are part of aligning our lives with God's plan. When you feel tempted to step outside these commands, that's when you really need to lean into trusting God. Let's take a minute to consider what happens when we try to control instead of trusting God. Imagine you're in a rush to get somewhere important and all the traffic lights turn red as soon as you get to them. It's frustrating, right? But what if those stops were keeping you from being in an accident just up the road? We can't see all the reasons for God's timing, just like we can't see what's ahead on the road. The Bible is filled with stories of people who trusted God in incredible ways. Think about Noah building the ark, Abraham preparing to sacrifice his son Isaac, or Mary accepting the role of Jesus' mother. These weren't easy situations, but they trusted God's plan above everything else. Their stories are reminders of the power of faith. Choosing to trust God is just that, a choice. It's something you have to decide every day. It's not always going to be easy. There will be days when you wonder if trusting God is worth it, especially when things aren't going your way. But that's exactly when trust becomes most crucial. Trusting God is built over time. It grows every time you choose faith over fear, every time you wait patiently instead of forcing a solution. It's like building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And as this trust grows, you'll find that your relationship with God deepens and becomes even more meaningful. If you find yourself struggling to surrender control or to trust in God's timing, remember David, Noah, Abraham, and Mary. Remember the sparrows, and remember that you are even more precious to God than they are. Trust that He is guiding you, just as He has guided countless others, with a plan far better than anything we could devise on our own. God knows every corner of the universe just like a local knows their own city. So when life tosses confusing choices your way, think of it like turning to that local for directions instead of another lost tourist. Trusting God means believing He knows the best path for you, even when it's one you wouldn't have chosen yourself. And just as you trust important people in your life like your family or friends, trusting God takes that to a higher level. He's not just any guide. He's the perfect guide who knows you better than anyone else, your past, present, and future. So when you're faced with decisions that push you to choose between your desires and what God might want, remember, it's not just about what's happening right now, but also about where He's leading you in the long run. Consider David's example once more. He could have ended his struggle and taken the throne by killing Saul, but he chose to wait on God's timing. That decision was far from easy. It meant more danger, more waiting, and more uncertainty. But David understood something crucial. His story was part of a larger plan that God had not just for him, but for all of Israel. In your own life, when you face tough choices, think of them as opportunities to deepen your trust in God. It's about more than just resisting temptation. It's about actively choosing to follow God's lead. This choice might mean sacrificing some of your deepest desires, but like David, you're being called to trust that God's plans for you are worth waiting for, and they lead to greater things.
or die. Straight